And I feel really honored to chair this talk of a real visionary, maybe one of the greatest visionary among us, because he's a chief visionary officer of the Zometool, and he's Paul Hildebrandt, whom most of you know all from before. And to mention some details about the Zometool. So, as many of you know, Steve Baer discovered the Zom geometry in 1969. So we are closing up to the 50th anniversary to the birth of Zometool, which will be in this decade in 2019. And it seems that another big conference, which have many connections and many friendships to the Symmetry Festival, the Bridges conference, will go to the Zometool headquarters to celebrate this 50th anniversary of Zometool to Boulder in 2019. And so as the story went on from the invention of the Zom geometry in 1969. Marc Pelletier and Paul Hildebrandt was those two heroes of this community who started to develop Zometool as really a useful kit for Nobel Prize laureates and also for children. So this is one of those examples, one of those equipments which really showing this intergenerational connection and usability of all these ideas what we are sharing at this conference. And we are very lucky to have also a Zometool workshop today, which will be a kind of a warm-up for the tomorrow Family Day programs. And the Zometool workshop will take place at 5:45 here, this small exhibition hall just under us. And tomorrow we will have this huge Zometool building, and now let's hear Paul's talk about Zometool as a tool for hands-on symmetry.
Thanks a lot. As Christoph said, we're hoping to do the Bridges Conference in Colorado, in Boulder County in 2019. And I live in Longmont, Colorado, which is at the base of Long's Peak, right up against the Front Range. And it's part of the Great American Desert. And so there's an anecdotal story of a town that was experiencing a great drought in the last century. And they all talked to the local preacher to see if he could do anything about it. And he said, well, come to church on Sunday and I'll preach. I'll preach for rain. And he was there at the church greeting everybody, and he noticed that nobody brought an umbrella. So he said, he got up in the pulpit and he said, well, you might as well go home. If nobody brought an umbrella, you can't expect it to rain. And that's kind of the way I feel talking about hands-on symmetry with Zometool. I was, Christoph, what are you asking me to talk about it for? It's not about talking, it's about doing. I see all of you, you've got your hands in your lap or on your computers, but nobody's got any pieces in their hands. In fact, there's not a Zometool component in the whole room. So if you're not going to come to the workshop, you might as well go home, right? Just go have a cup of coffee or something, because this is just going to be a waste of time. You know, it might be amusing, it might be slightly entertaining, but you're not going to get much out of it. Certainly not going to have any influence on your life. So now, I'm also a do-it-yourselfer. Like most people in the U.S., we have we imagine that we know how to fix things up. Like we think we can do carpentry, we think we can do plumbing, we think we can do electrical wiring. And of course, by doing that, we create this huge industry, not only of the people that sell the stuff, but also for the people that fix our mistakes, and the medical community that fix us when we hurt ourselves. But of course, I'm not like that. I go to the library, I need to do drywalling, I check out a book. I checked out this 300-page book from our library. It was a textbook for a drywalling course in a local vocational school. Well, I read through the thing, or looked through the table of contents. Not a word on how to do drywalling. They talked about the chemical structure of gypsum, and that sort of thing. But there wasn't anything in there about how to do drywall at all. And again, here it's about the same thing, right? There's nothing that I'm going to talk about today that's going to help you unless you get your hands on this stuff. Now, you may think that there's nothing worse than writing a textbook about drywall that doesn't teach you how to do drywall, or giving a talk about hands-on symmetry with Zometool where you've got your hands in your lab. But there is something worse than that. It's the way mathematics is taught in the United States. So I'm going to recommend to you this paper if you're not already familiar with it. If you're in math education, if you're a mathematician, or if you care about education in general, I think it's well worth reading. To quote Paul Lockhart in the paper, if I had to design a mechanism for the express purpose of destroying a child's natural curiosity and love of pattern making, I couldn't possibly do as good a job as is being done right now in the schools. I simply wouldn't have the imagination to come up with the kind of senseless, soul-crushing ideas that constitute contemporary mathematics education. And I think it's a pretty hard indictment, but I think it sort of hits the nail on the head, personally. For example, I want you all to imagine your first introduction to the number 2. All right? Can you close your eyes and just picture the first time you ran into the number 2? But if you're like most of us, you're probably seeing this, right? This is an abstract symbol. It has nothing to do with the number 2, right? It's not a sign that represents a number 2 because a sign has a relationship with the number 2. But a symbol has no relationship whatsoever. And this is the way they teach math in school, right? In the paper, Lockhart says, he imagines the teacher showing up in class on the first day of school and saying, today we're going to learn music, children. This is after you get out of kindergarten, right? So music is no longer doing nursery rhymes or singing or playing a drum or dancing. We're going to learn how to write scales. We're going to write little black notes on a staff, right? And you're going to be graded to make sure that E on the treble clef is right in the middle of that line, right? Not up or down, and it's a perfect oval. And of course, maybe in middle school you actually start learning how to write in the bass clef as well. By the time you get to high school, you might actually be able to study the texts of other musicians, but you can't until you're in the postgraduate program. You don't actually get to listen to music, right? Well, that's the way they teach math, right? Math is an art. It's beautiful. It's fun. Right? At least we believe it is as mathematicians and artists. So, Zometool, in Zometool, the number 2 is the blue stripe, right? It represents the number 2 in 3 and higher dimensions. When Mark Pelletier and I developed this, we had a choice. This was back in the early to mid 80s, that we thought, well, maybe we could do a computer program which would be not so expensive. You know, they had pretty powerful computers back then. We were able to crash a VAX 11780 trying to draw a hyperdodecahedron, but you could do graphics, right? And it would be quite a bit less expensive than building tooling and making plastic parts. But of course, we decided on the plastic parts simply because it's a hands-on tool. And really, you can think of Zometool as a 61-dimensional hypercubic lattice projected into 3 space. If you squash it again into 2 dimensions on a computer screen, you lose a lot of information, especially because human beings are living in this 3D hyperplane. We're not living in 2 dimensions, right? So that's Zometool. I'm going to talk a little bit about it, even though, as I said, it's not going to help you much until you get your hands on it. The number 2, the blue strut is the number 2. As you can see, it has a rectangular cross-section, a rectangle. In fact, it's a golden rectangle. It's obviously related to twofold symmetry, right? It has 2 long sides, 2 short sides. It has twofold mirror symmetry and twofold rotational symmetry in 2 directions. So a lot about that, the cross-section of that strut is a number 2. Now of course, this number 2 is made up of these number 2 struts, but you can see the orientation, you can see the hole that they go in. It's this golden rectangle, right? It's also got, it should have a length of the number 2, but with Zometool things sometimes get a little squirrely. Whoops, I'll back up. I am thrilled that you can find the divine proportion in cinder blocks. Now, I don't know what you're building with here in Europe, but in the US we build a lot of buildings with these blocks that measure 8 inches by 16 inches. And of course they have 1 by 2 symmetry. It's a 1 by 2 rectangle, and of course it's very simple to take this diagonal, which would be square root of 5, over 2, and run it over, and you get this beautiful golden rectangle. So it sort of thrills me that it's sitting there all the time, even though we don't see it. Even in these tiles up above our heads, right? We've got that divine proportion just waiting to be discovered in those squares, or the 1 by 2 rectangles. So the length of the blue strut is actually 1 relative to the other lengths. If you take the diagonal of a square, you get root 2. So it's the green line, which has 1-fold symmetry, has a length of 2. The blue line, which has 2-fold symmetry, has a length of 1. Of course, you could reverse that, right? And if we made the green lines have a length of 1, then the blue lines would have a length of root 2 over 2. So they're sort of like geometrical duals in 2 dimensions. And it kind of makes sense that you make a square out of the number 2 line, right? It's got 2 times 2 edges, 2 times 2 corners, 2-fold symmetry, and 2 times 2 directions. It's like a number 4 in 2 dimensions, right? And likewise, you'd make a cube out of squares. So the cube would be made out of the number 2 as well. But if you think about it, the cube has 6 faces, or 2 times 3 faces. It has 8 corners, 2 cubed corners. It has 12 edges, 2 times 2 times 3 edges. So there's this number 3 that keeps sticking out all over the place. Why? Well, I guess maybe because we're in 3 dimensions. And if we stick in the yellow lines, you can see that these actually are all 3-fold symmetry axes in the cube. And in fact, even the length of the line is related to the 3, because if you take Pythagoras, you can see the length of the line would be the square root of 1 squared plus 1 squared plus 1 squared, root 3 over 2, which is intimately related with the equilateral triangle, right? In fact, it's the height of an equilateral triangle made out of blue lines. Of course, all this is bullshit. Pardon my English. Because you're not going to get it until you play with it, right? But I see that since none of you have left the room yet, you're all planning to come to the workshop. And I told you to go home if you weren't interested in it, right? So I'm going to show you, if you cast a shadow with that cube along that 3-fold axis of symmetry, you get a hexagon, right? It's a 2-fold projection of a cube along a 3-fold axis of symmetry. It's lovely to do in the sunlight, which we can do this afternoon. We'll go out and play in the shadows. Again, 2 times 3 in 2 dimensions. It's got 6 corners. It's got 6 edges. It's made up of 6 triangles. Everything about it is really 2 times 3 in 2 dimensions. And that's what this is about. It's about appreciating those numbers in a way that you can feel in your hands and in your gut. Right? And I think every mathematician starts out by experiencing math with their mouths, right? With their hands. Your first experience of a number 2 was not a chalk scratched on a chalkboard, right? Your first experience of 2 was when you popped out of the womb, right? The first thing you saw was your mother's face, right? 2-fold mirror symmetry. Or if not that, you thought, well, it's lunchtime, and you go, wow, 2 of them. That's how we experience the number 2. As you're growing up, right? You're experiencing the 2 every time you're riding on the back of the bicycle here in Holland, right? We don't do that in the U.S., but you ride over the railroad tracks, ba-boom, right? 1, 2. Or if you're driving in the car, which we do in the U.S., you experience 2 times 2, ba-boom, ba-boom. Or your parents read a book like 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. by Dr. Seuss, right? It's 2 times 2 times 2, right? Rhyme has, and rhythm has that kind of additive symmetry. In fact, you can see it here in the poster, right? 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, right? And 1, 2, 4, 8. Okay, well, I haven't talked about the number 5 at all, but there is a 5-fold symmetry axis in Zometool too. It's the axis that is the basis of the DNA molecule that you'll be building with Laszlo tomorrow afternoon. And in fact, crystallized DNA does have 5-fold symmetry, and an artist friend of mine is convinced that it also has the divine proportion built into it. I suppose you can't really have 5-fold symmetry without the divine proportion, right? Draw a star inside of a pentagon, and you've got the divine proportion right there. Since you're coming to the workshop tomorrow, I'm going to tell you the rules. There are really only 2 rules in Zometool. If it works perfectly. If it doesn't work at all. So you can bend struts to make something fit together, but when it's built, it will be relaxed. So you have to follow the geometry that is molded into the parts. So that's the number 1 thing. And here it shows, if you're wondering what strut goes between 2 balls, you just hold it up and look through from one ball to the other, and you'll see that it's a rectangular hole, a pentagonal hole, or a triangular hole, and you know which strut to stick in there. It's going to be blue, yellow, or red, or else it's not. I mean, if there isn't something that fits in there, I didn't bring any green lines, so you're stuck. Don't have any orange or purples either, even though those are in the VZome software, which was written by Scott Bortman, and you can download it for free. Second rule, don't break it apart, take it apart. The parts do break. I can make them out of unbreakable material, but it costs 3 times as much, and all you have to do is just pop the ball off with your thumb. If you crush the model, if you rip it apart, you'll break the ends, and I have to replace them for free, so please don't. It's expensive. We did build a nice model at the Bridges conference. I'm probably over time because I started a little bit late. Sorry about that. But I thought I would show you the making of the pentadisc, which we did in Enschede. It's a little bit of a long animation, but see, we went off to lunch. But it's kind of a big structure, and it's kind of neat. And this does have 5-fold symmetry. Even though everything that's built here is done with blue lines, it's in the red plane, which is perpendicular to the blue lines. The red plane is perpendicular to the red line, and only blue lines exist in the red plane. But again, that's crap. You want to understand it, just play with the thing. I suppose I could take questions while this goes on. It lasts 3 minutes. And I didn't even get the end of it. Go ahead.
I was impressed with your very understanding assessment of current music education. Unfortunately, that's how music is mostly taught.
Oh my God.
But I'm pleased to know that there's now a big movement to change that, and we treat the number 2 as 2 things. And in fact, children discover that some beats have 2 sounds instead of 1, and that's the introduction to rhythm, and we represent it not with a number 2, but with 2 sticks.
Good. Well, I really wasn't dissing music education. I was saying if music were taught like that, everybody would hate music.
Well, I'm going to use you as an advocate because it's still common.
Now, I think you should watch on today because we actually have to test lifting the thing up. There, you see over here, this little red thing. That's a cable hanging down, and there's 2 more. We're going to hook it up and we're going to raise it up over the table. So you'll see it jump if you pay attention. It'll get up off the tables will back up, so forth.
Does this actually get to the full lifting process?
No, because I couldn't process the final one yet. It was too big. The file. So that was it. It just jumped up and went over. It keeps growing. Okay. Now on the 5th day, I think you might see the bear. We brought a bear that walked slowly across the model all day. Or maybe it's the 6th day, I don't know. But keep your eyes open.
How long did it take, this whole thing?
Well, we started working on it in February, and the panels were pre-glued mostly by Paul Fondafane. Dr. Fondafane worked 4 hours a day, every day for a month and a half, I think. So we're actually assembling pre-assembled pedals. This whole thing is glued together because essentially it needs to be a solid body when it's hung. We don't want to have any sagging. There was about a centimeter of deflection. Okay, so I think that the bear is going to show up here somewhere. Oh, here, first the camera has to fall. See, the bear is moving, but now, whoops! The camera fell on the floor. Put it back up. Now see him walking along. He decides it's time to go to bed, so he's going to come over and climb down. And I will show you the final model here from the inside.
Yeah.
It's really quite impressive. If you happen to be in Enschede, it's in the Saxion, the main building, I think, in what they call the Straat, on the second level, the first floor. So that's it. I'll see you tonight. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you very much. So it was a great warm-up for the tomorrow's family day, and you can rehearse a bit at today's workshop at 5:45 in this building. And I would like to also encourage you that when we will go to the family day tomorrow at 4 o'clock to the main square, if you have anything to show, you brought models or something, just bring it out to the square. We will have tables and you can exhibit it and explain to the people and so on, so we can make a great community event there and meet with the tourists and the inhabitants. So thank you very much.
If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So.
Oh, darn it.
That's a very specific question.
Okay.
What does that mean, zone?
Oh, it was invented by Steve Baer and Steve Durkee in 1968 or 1969. They said, you know what we're doing here is we're building zones. It's a sort of a concatenation of the word zonahedron and dome, because they actually built houses with this geometry in the first place. And interestingly enough, I one time asked Steve Baer, well, how did you know that the red line was cosine 18 of the blue line? And he said, well, that's where the pipes ran into each other. So that's how he discovered the math. He just happened to have the chops to actually see it was cosine 18. He built an icosahedron, and they all met at cosine 18 at the center.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to point out that I would have had my Zomotools with me, but I had to get them back to you.
Well, you'll have to ask me for more, I guess.
Okay. I fear that we run out of time, but Paul is here today and tomorrow as well, so you can have a lot of questions and requests to him. And now.